Good evening, and welcome to The Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy. And today, the date is May 15th, 2018. We have seen a lot of changes happen to Americans in the last year and a half since the election of Donald J. Trump. And for those who voted for him and who support him, I think they're probably fairly pleased with his performance so far. For those who believed that it was impossible for him to be elected, they are still anguished, they are outraged, they are hoping, praying that Mueller will be able to find some hook that he can use to drag Donald Trump off the stage. Now, so far nothing has been found, nothing has been proven, no attempt to discover collusion with the Russians has turned up anything. Nothing under any rock so far, at least not that we know. And the collusion investigation appears to be gradually rolling up and dissipating. The difficulty is, of course, that it is not really a criminal offense to be colluding with Russia. It is also difficult to indict a sitting president. There have been Supreme Court cases that have pretty much made that very, very unlikely. The only thing really that the Democrats can hope for is that when the midterm elections come around in November, that they will gain a lot of seats in the House and Senate, enough to get the votes to impeach Trump. Now what they will impeach him on, I'm really not sure. I haven't seen anything that would rise to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors that's required to be met for impeachment and removal from office in the Constitution. And we have to understand that we have to abide by the Constitution. And the Constitution is an antiquated, very antiquated document, but that's a good thing. The Constitution is now the oldest continuously used document in the history of the world. We have already achieved an amazing amount of just by the fact that America has lasted under one essential book of rules, that would be the Constitution, since its founding, is quite amazing. And we're breaking records every day. And Donald Trump seems to be delaying the inevitable destruction of the United States. Now, I've seen documentaries, read books about empire, and empires usually last about 250 or 300 years. And they have a life cycle which is very much like the life cycle of a human being. You have the energy of youth, the expansion of young adulthood, the maturity in which you enjoy your wealth, and you continue to expand, and you consolidate your gains, and you protect what you have gained, and then you have the slow decline, the degradation, the gradual weakening, and into possible moral and physical decadence, and then the ultimate destruction. And whether that would be in a volcanic or violent cataclysm or just a slow kind of fading away is depends on the empire, but we've seen it over and over. Every empire that has been created in the history of the world has eventually been destroyed. And so the American empire, we can assume, will eventually be destroyed, whether that will be sooner or later. Now we have the British Empire, which voluntarily, at least to all appearances, gave up its colonies, gave up the countries that it owned, allowed them to become independent countries. But there is, of course, still a relationship between many of the countries that were part of the British Empire and what is now called the United Kingdom. The people who live in those countries have special privileges, so they can, Indians can come to Britain, Pakistanis can come to Britain, and from many other places that were former British colonies, they can come to Britain, and they do come to Britain. So we have an awareness that everything changes. Change is a constant in the universe. That's one thing we can be guaranteed of, that if we have a good day or if things are going great now, just wait a while and they won't be going great. And then when they're not going great, just wait a while and they will be really good again or really great again. So here we have Trump saying, make America great again. And some people are saying, well, America is already great, or America never was great, or we don't even want America to be great. And we find the idea of making great offensive. I'm not quite sure why that would be offensive, but I think just the idea that America even exists is offensive to some people. And what we have is revisionism in history, tremendous amount of revisionism going on right now. I recently had an argument or a disagreement with someone about Andrew Jackson. And they were saying that Andrew Jackson was a really, really bad president. I said, well, he did kill the bank. That was his action that he was most proud of. And what did he mean by that? What he meant was, he was talking about the central bank. If you look at American history, there have been 4 central banks. And from what I've read, Andrew Jackson just killed the second one. I believe it was Teddy Roosevelt who got rid of the third one. And we now have the 4th one, and that's called the Federal Reserve. So Andrew Jackson was considered to be a very important president. And some people make comparisons between him and Donald J. Trump. Both are populists. Both have the support of what are known as the common people, or maybe we would call them the silent majority now. The ordinary people, the rural people, the people who are often marginalized, the people who are not really cool or hip or with it, like many of the people who live in the big cities on both coasts. Those are the people, and the people who go and are involved in that very active urban lifestyle. They're the ones who tend to be big Hillary supporters or Obama supporters. So Donald Trump has also been described as a result of Obama. In other words, the reason why he was elected is because people were racist, and Obama got elected, who was multiracial, and they didn't like that, so they wanted to elect the whitest guy that they could get, and that turned out to be Donald Trump. Well, there were 15 or 16 other Republican candidates, and they were all white, more or less. There was a couple of them who were kind of dark. But to say that he was elected because he was white is unfair to him, and it's because considering the controversial and unconventional tactics that he used in order to get to win the presidency. We have to also understand that people may have been looking exactly for that type of thing. They're very frustrated with the way that the culture is leaning. Some people are. The political correctness movement is a real problem for a lot of Americans. Other people are perfectly fine with it. Well, one thing we have to remember is that political correctness is essentially a Marxist idea. And that's originally where it came from. Political correctness is something you saw in the Soviet Union or Communist China, even to this day in Communist China. You cannot say under political correctness certain things which are considered to be dangerous or even criminal, to say these certain things. You cannot have certain ideas. You cannot have certain thoughts that are against the government or the dominant power. And what is the dominant power? We could say, well, the Republicans are dominant in the United States. We could also say that, temporarily, you could say that. You could also say that the left-leaning side, the Democratic side, is dominant in many areas. And we can list them off. Hollywood, for instance, very left-wing dominated. The media, the mainstream media, very dominated by the left. The educational institutions, the universities, very dominated. They've just done a study that in these Ivy League colleges, big state colleges, something like 80% are left-wing among the professors, 80%. So that would be not a fair representation of the divide and the political divide and the way people think in the country. But the political correctness, many people find stifling and even frightening, because their views, they feel threatened by people who shun them or disparage them, or even threaten their livelihood or even their life because of their views. And you might say, oh, no, only right-wing people threaten people's lives or careers, your job, get you fired. But no, actually, the left does it. Antifa does more than just fight in the streets with or prevent right-wing or conservative or libertarian speakers from stepping foot and speaking in a public forum on college campuses. No, they do a lot more than that. And we have to, we can look and see how they shut down political speech whenever they possibly can by doxing people. There is a dancer, not a dancer, she calls herself a performance artist, and she's from New York City, born and bred, New York City. She's a very Spanish-looking woman, and she does a bit of burlesque, and she's in this burlesque and performing arts community that is apparently thriving in New York City. But almost all of them are extremely left-wing. You have, transgender people. You have feminists who are doing the performance art, using their own menstrual blood on stage and this type of thing, and lots of different things. And very political, some of it, very anti-Trump, cross-dressing people who do these performances. And in New York City, people hire these people for parties just to add some weirdness to the party, or just for the entertainment. And this woman is named Martina Marcota. Sounds very Spanish. She says she's from the Eastern European. My girlfriend and I were wondering. It doesn't sound like a very Eastern European name, but her stage name is Lady Alchemy. And what happened was, and you can look this up online, Martina Marcota, and her stage name is Lady Alchemy, Alchemy, and she goes for the elegance and these sexy outfits, but very elegant, very tasteful, and slow movements, kind of slow posturing. She was making quite a bit of money, making a very good living doing this. But when her colleagues found out about her politics, that she supported Trump, they decided that she was a Nazi and started calling her a Nazi. Then they told Antifa about her. Antifa decided they were going to make sure that she never worked in New York City again. And whenever she would get a gig, if they found out about it, they would call her employer and say, hey, do you know that you just hired a Nazi? This is according to her. This has been going on for a couple of years. They are relentless. And she's wondering now if she could even get a job at Starbucks, and they wouldn't call, wondering if they wouldn't call Starbucks and just say all these awful things about her. She sounded like a very nice person. I've seen a couple of interviews with her. She's decided to go the legal route, and she even went to the police. It's becoming harassment on a criminal level by these Antifa people. So she has decided she has no other choice because they're not going to stop. She assumed they would stop, but so far they have not stopped and let her get back to her life. And I don't know what she's going to do. It sounds like she's done with the life of a performance artist in New York City. So you see that any ideology, when it gets self-righteous, when it feels it has taken the high moral ground, when it feels that anyone else who thinks differently is wrong, this is a recipe for disaster. If our founders ever gave us anything of value, it was to understand that in order to have a stable and long-standing country, a community of people, we must be diverse. And not just diverse in color, but diverse in thought. There is no excuse for preventing people from expressing their views, their political views, no matter how extreme or offensive they may be to you. Because if you prevent them from expressing their political views, why is it not possible or even likely that your own views in the future at some point will also be curtailed? And God forbid we should actually begin to pass laws that make these unconventional or oppositional views illegal. But in reality, that has already begun. The laws are being put in place in many countries around the world. And this is extremely troubling development. And this is why the election of Donald J. Trump, who is actively pushing against political correctness. Remember, political correctness is the idea or the notion that you have the right to shut someone else down for their views, whether it would be from shunning, whether it be from fines or actual jail time, or, simply beating them up on the street, which also happens. There have been many videos of people giving their views, and even to like camera crews, when someone comes up and just punches them or maces them in the face. Really violent stuff where the blood actually flows. And so to say that one side or the other is pure and as the driven snow is absolutely false. Now, another politically correct term that is not supposed to be used, or it's an anti-politically correct term, is nationalism. And this really grinds the gizzard of the people who believe that the nation state is required for a smoothly or relatively smoothly running or less chaotic world. Because in general, we can see from history and from modern history and ancient history, both, is that smaller systems tend to work better than larger systems. And this is where the idea of the firewall comes in. In a ship is divided into compartments, and they can be sealed off. And what are they sealed off with? They're walls. In a car, we have a firewall that prevents you, the cab, from the operator of the vehicle in the cab from being hurt if the engine were to blow up, for instance, or there be a fire in the engine compartment of a car. The same thing in a ship. The compartments, if one compartment is punctured and water pours in, that compartment can be sealed off, and the rest of the ship will float. The idea of globalism is that you have one giant system, not interconnected small systems, but one giant system. And you might say, oh, that's not true. No. Globalism is not that. But no, globalism is that. Because the example of the EU has subsumed the sovereignty of all the nations that are in the EU, European Union, under the command and control of a small group of unelected men in Brussels, the European Commission. They make the laws, and those laws are enforced, or will be enforced. They're enforced now by economic sanctions. But the European Union is actually beginning to create its own army. That means that they'll be willing to use military force against non-compliant, subservient vassal states in this giant superstate called the European Union. Now you might say, yeah, but the European Union has a parliament, the European Parliament, and that is true. But the European Parliament is a parliament in name only. Although the members of the parliament are elected, they do not have the ultimate say of what goes in the European Union. In fact, they're nothing more than a rubber stamp for the European Commission. They cannot pass laws, they cannot veto laws, they cannot promote laws. They are essentially a rubber stamp. It's a show parliament. And if you look online at the European Parliament, you'll oftentimes see not very many people, not even in there. There's a small group of people in the European Parliament. There are many, many, many empty seats in the European Parliament. You have somebody like Nigel Farage, who is a member of the European Parliament, who brought it to the world's attention, these amazing truths about the failings of the European Union. And the European Union is an experiment in globalism. And it was meant, if it succeeded, to be expanded to the entire globe. Now another experiment, a much earlier experiment, is the experiment of China. Chairman Mao was funded by Western bankers and Western plutocrats to create a communist society that would benefit the rich, the wealthy, the super rich. By taking away the individual landowning property rights of individuals in China, which they did, the communists, when they did, and many, many people died as a result. Same thing that happened in an earlier experiment in the Soviet Union. The Bolsheviks were also funded by Western powers, by internationalists. They're mostly Western, bankers and industrialists, and the wealthiest people on the planet. And make no mistake, the wealthiest people on the planet is not people like Bill Gates, Zuckerberg, these type of people. No, these are second-tier billionaires, multi-billionaires. Trump may be third or fourth tier, something like that. No, above them are the old families, the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and the other families that have essentially invented the modern banking system, which is nothing more than a way of creating debt in which you vacuum up the world's wealth over time. You know, in many of these modern ideas are very simplistic. And some countries, a few countries, like Finland, I believe, have actually adopted or attempted to adopt the idea that each family or each person should get a certain amount of money given to them by the government, even though they have a job or they don't have a job. And the money presumably would be coming out of taxes. But you could say, well, this is a redistribution of wealth. And the wealthy would eventually be able to they would be forced to pay their fair share. But the extremely wealthy, the people at the very top, whose names do not even appear in the newspaper or on the TV or on the radio, very rarely anyway. So most people have forgotten they even exist, if they ever knew in the first place. They would be exempt. They control, they do not necessarily own. Or their ownership is so convoluted that it's impossible to understand, to even contemplate or record the amount of wealth that they actually have. And even if much of their wealth was distributed, within a matter of a very few years, that wealth would all come back to them anyway. And this has been demonstrated before with giveaway programs, that it all ends up back in the hands of the wealthy in a very short time. It's because this is the way the system is set up. And it's not a natural system. Nature, it's not, what I mean by natural, it is the universe simply does not operate that way. We may all be born equal, and we are, everyone is born equal. We're all human beings, we're all equal because we're human beings. But there are so many variables that contribute to our worth, or whether we prosper or do not prosper, that very, very soon, after each human being is born, the differences in material wealth begin to show. and this is inevitable. And those who are, it's like if you gave each person $1 million or $100,000, every person in the United States, some people would blow that money within a matter of months. Others would squirrel it away and just hold on to it. Then inflation would gradually erode it. Others would invest it wisely. Some would, and within a very short period of time, you would have pretty much a very similar situation to what you started out with. So this is why the idea of giving people a monthly income that's equal is not necessarily going to help people. Some people will take advantage of that and get very wealthy. They will accumulate a lot. They will start scooping up other people's money just because they make themselves, they put themselves in a position in which they have an advantage through, their skills or whatever it is, whatever skills that they have, that's what they will do. And so no one will ever remain equal. We hear a lot about equality. It's a level playing field. That's what we're really talking about. A level playing field is fair. But to talk about equality of outcome or distributing the wealth, which is the dream of Karl Marx, at least it appeared to be his dream. But in reality, Marxism has never been shown to work in creating equity or equality of outcome in the countries where it has been experimented with or put into operation or attempted to be put into operation. In Cuba, we hear a lot of good things about Cuba, with it people are getting good health care, supposedly. That's mostly what I hear about Cuba. Good health care and education. So the government provides those two things. But amazingly, I have not been to Cuba. I'd like to go to Cuba, but I've heard from several different sources that really Cuba has a tremendous amount of problems. Cuba has an infrastructure that is decaying, and they are not able to bring that country up to really a workable level. And also there's tremendous poverty in Cuba. I did not know that. But I talked to some people recently that said the poverty was just shocking and appalling in Cuba. Now we're also seeing, and this is a socialist state, we're also looking, you can look at Venezuela. That's a perfect example of a socialist, a really serious attempt at a socialist paradise, which went wrong in a big way. They started printing money out the wazoo, got hyperinflation, and you have people starving, cutting up zoo animals for food and fighting with each other. It's apparently the lawlessness in Venezuela is amazing. You have a mass exodus of citizens of trying to escape Venezuela to Colombia. I was just reading about that the other day. And Colombia can't handle anymore. They've already, they don't know what to do with them. They're filling up the cities and causing problems with crime and prostitution and trying to survive because they can't survive back in Venezuela very well. You have the military and the police carting these people over the line, deporting them crossing over back into Venezuela, dropping these people off, and then they just walk right across the border again, and they're back in Colombia. So this is the result. This is the result of what we get from a top-down command and control, ideologically driven socialist society, which, in an attempt to achieve equality, does not reward ingenuity, hard work, cleverness, intelligence, talent, genius, the way a capitalist society does. And so the motivation to work hard is, you have a negative motivation in a socialist society to work hard and be innovative. You just want to go into your job, get your money, and get out. Because there's no real hope for advancement. Because however you try to advance, that money, that extra gain you get, will be taken away from you in the name of equal distribution of the wealth. That, we all own it, and so we should all share equally. So this may work on a small scale, but on a large scale, and the bigger the scale, the worse it functions. So you have the example of Red China, which is communist, but the only way that the communist leadership, the party, could actually be tolerated and avoid its own destruction was to allow in the big industrialists, who are essentially capitalists. And so now you have a situation in China in which some people are doing very, very well because of the capitalism, and other people are still in horrific poverty. And this would be in the smaller towns, in the rural areas. And they're leaving their farms, or being run out of their farms, their villages, their traditional way of life, and they're flocking to the cities, hoping for a better life. This is a pattern that we've seen in many, many different countries. Now, the amazing thing is that China has been able to keep this up for so long. One of the ways that they keep it up is by expansion. You have an enormous country in China, not as big as Russia, but a lot of people, a lot of incredible potential in China, and people know this. The big industrialists know this, the internationalists know this. And China has been flexing its muscles recently. And they are positioning themselves to take over when the American empire fails. In fact, they're pushing toward making those deals behind America's back. And the internationalists have bet their money on Communist China. They like the Communist China model better than they liked the American model, which is the individual freedom model, where people are allowed to rise and keep a great proportion of their earnings for the extra hard work or the innovation or whatever it is that they've come up with. They like the Chinese model better because it is better for them. Their profits are actually greater when you have this enormous workforce all working for a small amount of money, except for a few people at the top. They're doing very well. They're buying up Hollywood studios. They're buying up prime land around the world. They're getting control of resources in countries in Africa, in South Asia, in South America. and all the undeveloped resources are being worked on by China. And it's possible that Donald Trump, in his recognition of the danger posed for American prosperity, realizes that all his efforts will be nothing more than a speed bump to the globalist masters of the universe, masters of the world. We'll see how it all works out. But Donald Trump, from his experience in the very, very competitive, cutthroat, and dangerous world of Manhattan. I mean, I can hardly think of a more dangerous world with all these competing players in New York City. That Donald Trump, he born in Queens, just up the road from Manhattan, just uptown, and very much a part of that world. And that's the way he thinks, that's the way he talks, that's where he gets the chip on his shoulder and the attitude that he has. And this is something that he's always had. And if you talk to people like him, you will find that they're similar in a lot of ways. They're not like people from the Midwest or even people from California. They have a special edge and a special grittiness and a hardness and a toughness that is a result of that pressure cooker environment of Manhattan and New York City and the East Coast, but especially New York City. So we might say, well, he's un-PC, he's not PC. Well, that was part of his strategy. He believes that that is necessary or required in order to gain the support of the American people. He rightly estimated or judged that the American people were getting tired of the constrictions of political correctness. And the thing about cultural Marxism, because that's really where political correctness comes from, is that it cannot stop. It cannot say, this is enough. We've gone far enough. No, it must continue to push forward, because otherwise the revolutionary edge is dulled. The knife that cuts through the old ways no longer will cut if it is not constantly used to chop and cut and mutilate the old ways of seeing the world and the mental constructs, the moral constructs. And if there is no opponent, once you've chopped apart your opponent in cultural Marxism, then you must continue to look for new targets. And you look among your own. And the more committed, the more radical element in the cultural Marxist politically correct movement will find slackers or people who are not 100% or 110% committed to the ideology. And then you will attack them. And they who thought they were your colleagues will be amazed, and because they themselves, here they thought you were on their side. Then they become attacked because they must have an opponent. And this is the way an ideology works very often, a very strict ideology. Without an opponent, without a pushback, without a constant revolution. You remember, if you look at your history, the revolution is ongoing. It never ends. We're talking about Soviet Union, Communist Red China. For instance, in the 60s, the Red Guard. Mao saw that his followers were losing their edge. The revolutionaries were becoming comfortable. They were beginning to enjoy the luxury of their position. And he realized, in order to stay on top, we must have an opponent. So who is going to be an opponent? And he launched the Cultural Revolution in the 60s. And he harnessed the energy and the power and the enthusiasm of the youth, of the teenagers, of the college students, and told them to go out and root out the slackers, the comfortable, the wealthy, those who'd gained over many years and profited from the communist system, or the little bit of middle-class ideology that it was allowed to remain in the communist system. The shopkeepers, the philosophers, the university professors, anyone who was beginning to think for themselves and question the rigid ideology of the Marxist, the Maoist philosophy of total control from one man or one group of men. And they routed them out. Those students routed them out. And they pummeled them. And they mocked them. And they beat them. And they killed them. And they ruined them. And this is what some people are beginning to fear is what we're seeing happening in the United States today and in many other European countries. And anyone who questions open border policy, for instance, is considered a racist. But the whole idea, the whole notion and purpose of open borders is the destruction of sovereignty. That would be national sovereignty. And I've even had Marxist friends who've used the word nationalism as if it were a swear word or a dirty word, that, oh, he's a nationalist. And God forbid he should be a white nationalist. Although it's been pointed out that a person can be nationalist and be white and not be a white nationalist. But I've questioned to my friends, what do you mean by nationalism? And they're not even sure what they mean, really, when it comes right down to it. Oh, someone who supports the country. Well, why is that dangerous? Well, because if you support your nation, then you might become fascist. Look at what happened in Germany. The Nazis were nationalists. Well, you can always use an extreme example, but you can look at ways in which nationalism has really helped, too. You can look at the example of Switzerland. Switzerland is in the middle of Europe, and yet it is not a part of the European Union. Why not? So European Union has a big hole right in the middle, which is Switzerland. And why would they not join the European Union? Why? Because they don't need the European Union. They need to have a sovereign nation, because they know that they will be robbed by the European Commission. And Switzerland has one of the highest standards of living in the world, maybe the highest. And it is where the rich and the wealthy hide their money. And now are you beginning to see why Switzerland has not joined the European Union? The rich hide their money there discreetly in their privately numbered bank accounts. Very safe, protected by the mountains, protected by an armed population in Switzerland. Yes, Switzerland has not disarmed its citizens. It has required every citizen, every head of a household, to have an automatic weapon and to know how to use it and to be trained to use it. In case Switzerland should be attacked, the population can rise up in its own defense. This is the purpose of what is known as the Second Amendment, which is number 2 in the Bill of Rights. Very clearly states that the purpose of the amendment is that people should be allowed to keep and bear arms to secure the security, to defend the free state. It is not for hunting, it is not for target shooting. It is to secure the blessings of democracy, of the republic, as envisioned by the founders. This is why the First Amendment is number 1, too, is that people should have the right to speak freely without censorship. We're seeing both these happen. Both of these amendments are under deep attack. The Fourth Amendment, almost destroyed. This is the Bill of Rights we're talking about. This is the most sacrosanct portion of the Constitution. It's the heart of the Constitution. The rest of the Constitution is like the operating manual for the United States. How it's going to work, the various branches of government, how long the president should be allowed to remain in office, all the basics. But then you have the foundation is the Bill of Rights. And when you tear away at the Bill of Rights, you tear away at the foundations of the United States. And those who want to destroy the United States, they will destroy the United States by tearing away at the Bill of Rights. There will be no country left. The reason why people want to come to the United States from all over the world, from China, from South America, from Africa, from many other countries that are oppressed, from India, is because we have the Bill of Rights. And so the rule of, they lay out the rights of American citizens. Not the rights that are given to them by the government, but the rights that they inherently are born with. This is the whole idea of the Bill of Rights, that these cannot be taken away from human beings. They're born with them. Or you could say they're inherent, they're God-given. Cannot be separated from those rights. And you can say, well, what about these high school shootings? Well, what about them? Yes, there are high school shootings. There are also people who chop people up with machetes by the hundreds, by the thousands, by the millions. Look at Rwanda. Back in the 90s, almost 1 million people killed, mostly with machetes, my understanding is. No access to guns. A sharp machete can do a lot of damage in a very short period of time. Look at the other weapons, many weapons that are available to people. In Europe, trucks are a popular mass murdering weapon. It's amazing we haven't seen more of it in the United States. And it's probably because we are attempting to keep our borders closed. And we have the rule of law, and we have an aggressive police force, and we have a strong military. And it's a shame, you could say, that the world is like this. And why couldn't it be better? And why do we need countries? Countries are artificial constructs. And why couldn't we all just live together in harmony as one human race? But there's many people in the world who do not want to see that. They do not want to see people live in harmony. They want people to lose their country, lose the protection provided by their government, and become essentially wanderers without any rights on a world that is run by them. And are they ordinary folks who are good? Maybe, but maybe not. And this is why they say that power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Whoever wants to get rid of countries and have one global system must acknowledge that someone has to run that system. And who will it be? Who will be the emperor of the world? And what will that power do to them once they become emperor of the world? Will it be one man? How dangerous would it be if someone could just say, this group of people, and let's say no countries exist, this ethnic group, these people are inferior. They're really problems. They're really causing problems. They're not going along with the plan. They should be exterminated. Or we're just going to cut off their food. Or we're going to initiate sanctions against them. We're going to prevent them. Or now with the high-tech solution, you have the idea of being able to turn off people's cars from outer space. Everything controlled from satellites. Everything Wi-Fi, everything wireless. And if you're not a good person, hey, your car just won't start. Okay? So that's how simple it is. That's how technology can be used to destroy our freedoms and destroy our lives over time. So we'll see how it all turns out. That's all for today. Have a great weekend. Sleep well.